The sign on the door said, "Closed." Not closed for the weekend. Not closed for renovation. Closed permanently. Your money? Gone. In 1933, over 4,000 American banks failed in a single year. People who had saved their entire working lives walked up to the door of their bank and found a sign. And then they went home and figured out how to survive without it. What they figured out is what I want to show you today. Let me give you the scale of what happened. October 1929, stock market collapse. By 1933, the lowest point, unemployment in the United States had reached 25%. 1 in 4 working Americans had no job. Not 1 in 20, not 1 in 10, 1 in 4. Nearly half the country's banks had failed. Savings accounts that families had built over decades were gone overnight. Farms were foreclosed. Families who had owned their homes for 2 generations lost them to banks that then also failed. The federal government's relief programs, the New Deal, the Breadlines, the Civilian Conservation Corps, reached a portion of those who needed help. Sociological studies documented in detail what happened to the rest. They fell back on systems that predated banks. Systems built on skills, on community, on trust between neighbors, on growing what you eat and eating what you grow. Those systems kept millions of families alive through 10 years of economic collapse. And here is what nobody tells you. Every single one of those systems still works today, exactly the same way. You already know this economy exists. You've seen it. The neighbor who fixes your fence in exchange for help moving furniture. The informal arrangement where someone watches a child in exchange for home-cooked meals 3 times a week. The community where everyone brings something to share and everyone leaves with more than they came with. That is the barter economy. It has existed in every human community on every continent since before money was invented. It does not require a bank. It does not require a functioning supply chain. It does not require a government that is solvent. It requires 2 things, something you can offer, and a community that knows you can offer it. The Depression didn't create this economy, it revealed it. Stripped everything else away until what remained was what had always been there, underneath. Here is a number that most people have never heard. During the Great Depression, sociologists documented over 150 distinct local barter systems operating across the United States. Not informal neighbor-to-neighbor trades. Organized systems, with printed script, local currency that circulated within communities, with directories of goods and services available, with clearing systems so that no transaction required 2 parties to want exactly what each other had. In some communities, these systems handled thousands of transactions per month, with 0 involvement from banks, 0 involvement from the federal government. Built and maintained entirely by people who had decided that survival was more important than waiting for the official system to function again. They were right. Strategy number 1, the barter economy. Here is the insight that the Depression generation understood and that most people today have forgotten. Skills are wealth, not skills in the abstract, specific, demonstrable, useful skills. The ability to repair an engine, to preserve food, to sew a garment that fits, to build a fence that holds, to keep bees, to grow food in difficult soil. These are things people need. They needed them in 1933, they need them now. In a cash economy, you exchange money for them. In a disrupted economy, you exchange them directly. A 2019 study in the Journal of Economic Sociology documented that communities with higher rates of skill diversity, meaning more people with practical, tradable skills, showed greater economic resilience during periods of market instability. The Depression generation didn't read that study. They lived it. The practical question is, what do you have to offer? Not what credential, not what job title. What can you do that solves a problem for someone else? That skill, whatever it is a form of economic independence that no bank failure, no currency devaluation, and no supply chain disruption can touch. Here's the one thing most people get wrong about barter. They think it requires someone who wants exactly what they have. It doesn't. It requires a community where trust is established, contributions are tracked informally,
and reciprocity is understood to operate over time rather than in a single transaction. That community has to be built before you need it, not during a crisis, before. Strategy number 2. Credit unions. While commercial banks were failing by the thousands in the early 1930s, credit unions, community-owned financial cooperatives, had a dramatically lower failure rate. The difference was structural. A commercial bank answers to shareholders. Its goal is profit. When profit requires making risky loans, it makes risky loans. When those loans fail, depositors pay the price. A credit union answers to its members. The depositors are the owners. The goal is not profit. It is financial stability and service to the people who make up the institution. When neighbors lent to neighbors, and the lending decisions were made by people who knew the borrowers personally and lived in the same community, the loans performed better, because the information was better, and because the relationships created accountability that formal credit scores cannot replicate. Today, there are over 4,800 federally insured credit unions in the United States, serving over 130 million members.
Most people have never considered one.
They use the bank they were handed when they opened their first account at 18 and never thought to ask whether there was a better option.
There is.
Credit union accounts are federally insured to the same level as bank accounts. They typically offer lower fees, better interest rates on savings, and lower rates on loans. The only thing they don't offer is the same level of marketing, which is probably why most people don't know about them. Directly. Victory Gardens.
During World War II, which followed the Depression and involved many of the same families, the U.S. government promoted a national program encouraging Americans to grow food in their backyards, vacant lots, and public spaces. At its peak in 1943, an estimated 20 million Victory Garden plots across the country produced approximately 40% of all vegetables consumed in the United States.
40%. From backyard and community gardens. This wasn't a fringe movement. It was a mainstream national response to scarcity. The same families who had survived the Depression on homegrown food extended that practice into the war years because they already knew what they were doing. The knowledge did not disappear when the crisis ended. The practice did.
Because when food became cheap and convenient again, growing it yourself stopped feeling necessary.
It starts feeling necessary again when food prices rise, supply chains falter, and the question of where your next meal comes from becomes concrete. Debt elimination. The households that survived the Depression with the least damage had one structural advantage in common.
They had no debt, no mortgage payments, no installment payments, no credit obligations that had to be met regardless of whether income arrived.
Sociological studies of Depression-era communities documented clearly that debt was the primary mechanism by which otherwise capable families lost everything. Families that owned their homes outright, their tools outright, their land outright, had options. Families that owed money had deadlines. The financial system we live in today is specifically designed to make debt feel normal, manageable, and even virtuous.
The Depression generation, the ones who survived it, knew otherwise.
Here is how to begin applying any of this today. On Skills and Barter, write down 3 things you can do that solve real problems for other people. Not interests, not hobbies you'd like to develop, existing abilities. Then consider who in your immediate community, neighbors, people at your church, your local farmer's market, might value those things. That list is the beginning of your alternative economy. On credit unions, go to mycreditunion.gov, enter your zip code, see what's available in your area, compare fees and rates to what you're currently paying. If the numbers are better, and they usually are, the process of switching is straightforward.
On food production, plant one thing this season that you'll eat. Not a project, one thing. Lettuce in a pot, tomatoes on a porch, herbs in a window box. Establish the habit before scaling the system.
On debt, identify the single smallest debt you carry and create a plan to eliminate it before anything else. Not the largest, the smallest, because eliminating one debt completely changes the psychology of the rest.
These are starting points, not a complete plan. The complete plan is built from starting points.
I know what some of you are thinking.
The Depression was different. We have safety nets now. The FDIC insures bank deposits. Unemployment insurance exists. The government will intervene. All of that is true.
And all of it was also true in 2008, when roughly 500 banks failed, when millions of people lost their homes in foreclosures that happened faster than any safety net could respond, and when the gap between what the system promised and what it delivered became visible in ways that a generation of Americans had not seen before.
Safety nets catch some people. They don't catch everyone.
The question is not whether the current system will fail completely. The question is whether you have built anything that functions when the current system underperforms. That is not a paranoid question. That is the question every generation before ours answered, as a matter of routine, before it became necessary to have the answer. The thing about the Depression generation that keeps sitting with me is not what they did, it's what they understood.
They understood that the official economy, the banks, the employers, the supply chains, was a system built by people, maintained by people, and therefore capable of failing the way anything built by people can fail.
They did not think the system was evil. Most of them wanted it to work. They simply also maintained, as a matter of habit, the older systems that existed before it. They grew food, they built and repaired things, they knew their neighbors.
They owed as little as possible to anyone they didn't trust.
And when the official system failed them, as it failed a quarter of the working population of the most powerful economy on Earth, they had something to fall back on.
Not because they were afraid, because they were practical.
My grandfather used to say that the most dangerous thing a person can do is become so dependent on a system they don't control that they forget how to live without it.
He was a child during the Depression. He never forgot how to live without it. I don't think we should either.
Take care. I'll see you in the next one.